The Reverend Jesse Jackson, American civil rights activist, Baptist minister, and a citizen diplomat on the international stage.
This is a guy who, when you traveled with him, was as comfortable in Cairo as he was in Chicago.
I'm Marco Werman. Today, the global legacy of Jesse Jackson. Also, why remittances to Mexico are falling, and India looking to be a major player in the AI space.
India is also trying to position this in some ways as almost the flag bearer for the global south at large.
Plus, a new prime minister for Bangladesh, and advocates in Indonesia push back on the country's high rate of cigarette consumption.
So we are really surrounded by this aggressive marketing approach by the tobacco industry.
All those stories and more today here on The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. Thank you for coming along this Tuesday. We begin today's show looking back at the life of Reverend Jesse Jackson. The American civil rights icon, minister, and politician died today at the age of 84. Jackson is being celebrated as a protege of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and an advocate for human rights and economic justice. But he'll also be remembered for his informal diplomacy on the international stage. Jackson helped negotiate the release of prisoners and hostages in Cuba, Iraq, and Syria. After Reverend Jackson secured the release of a U.S. Navy pilot held captive in Syria in 1984, he stood beside President Ronald Reagan in the Rose Garden. Reverend Jackson seemed happy to share the credit for a mission few expected would succeed.
President Reagan had the option to stop our mission. He had the option to interfere or to intervene. He did neither.
James Zogby traveled with Reverend Jackson throughout the Middle East. Zogby is a pollster and the co-founder of the Arab American Institute. Jim, I know you were very close to Reverend Jackson, so on what must be a tough day for you, I just wanted to start by offering our condolences.
Thank you. It has been a tough day, and there have been almost 5 decades of memories just rushing through my head. He was so important to me, to my community, to issues that we all care about, and he has a legacy that has affected so many people, just a world historical individual.
His legacy in the U.S. in civil rights is clear. How should Reverend Jackson be remembered as a global figure on the international stage?
This is a guy who, when you traveled with him, was as comfortable in Cairo as he was in Chicago. Walking the streets, people knew him. They waved. They wanted their picture taken with him. They wanted to touch and shake his hand. And he used that political capital to advocate for justice, to challenge authorities, and to seek freedom for prisoners, and in one case to go to Armenia after a terrible natural disaster, to give hope to people. He did things like that because he knew he had this appeal, and he used it for the good, much like the Pope would. He was a person who, wherever he went, was recognized, and people knew that he could do good things for them.
Jim, let me take you back to 1979. You worked closely with Jackson when he first met the then leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, Yasser Arafat, in Beirut. What was Jackson trying to accomplish?
Well, he was infuriated by the fact that Andy Young had met with the PLO representative at the UN.
Andrew Young was UN ambassador under Carter, correct?
Right, and former civil rights leader in his own regard. And when Andy Young got fired for that, Jesse said, "We're going." Arrangements were made. He talked about how he deplored the U.S. no-talk policy. You can't have peace if you don't talk. And so he said, "I'm going to meet Arafat," and he did. It didn't change the policy, but he challenged the Democratic Party to end its no-talk policy about the issue of Palestinian rights and justice. And so in 1988, we led a fight within the party convention to have the question of Palestine discussed. We had a plank. It was mutual recognition, territorial compromise, and self-determination for both Israelis and Palestinians. There was an uproar, and I negotiated with Madeleine Albright, and she said to me, when I said, "We just want the issue of Palestinian rights mentioned in the platform," she said, "If the P word is even spoken, all hell will break loose." There was pressure within the Jackson campaign of some of the electeds. Please don't do this. There'll be a backlash. He looked at me and he said, "We're going to do it, but let's figure a way to do it that doesn't tear things apart." We won the moral high ground because we ended the silence on Palestine. And he awakened a wing in the party, a progressive wing, that carried on that tradition, that said, we're going to represent those who don't have a voice right now. For my community, it was significant because up until his campaign in 84, no candidate had ever had an Arab American committee, had reached out to the Arab American community. They had actually returned our contributions and rejected our endorsements. Jesse changed all that. And he said, we're going to be a home for Arab Americans, a home for Jewish Americans, and we're going to work together. And we did. And that continued. We elected 80 delegates, Arab Americans, in 1988. Prior to that, we'd had 4. And candidates now seek our contributions, and it opened a door for us that had never been opened before.
I'm speaking with James Zogby, co-founder of the Arab American Institute, and more relevant to this conversation, a close associate for a number of years with the late Reverend Jesse Jackson. So you did not accompany Jackson to Syria in 1984, where he won the release of Navy pilot Robert Goodman. Let's hear this. This is President Reagan at what he called a joyful reunion in the Rose Garden.
Reverend Jackson's mission was a personal mission of mercy, and he has earned our gratitude and our admiration.
Jim Zogby, why did you advise Reverend Jackson against making that trip to Syria?
You have to ask me that. He'd asked me to prepare the ground and see what was possible. People in the campaign were, if this isn't going to work, we don't want to do it. It's too close to the election. I could not get a guarantee that he would meet with Assad. Certainly couldn't get a guarantee that he would free Goodman. And so I advised him not to go. So that always will be a black stain on my biography. I'm the guy that told Jackson not to go to Syria. But he knew that he would get it done because of the power of his personality, and that Assad was not going to say no once Jesse Jackson set foot in the country. He knew if he could just get there, he'd get it done, and he did.
It was a pretty big risk, though, wasn't it?
It was, but his life was one of taking risks, wasn't it? And he took them when it was the right thing to do, and he did the good thing that needed to get done. Nobody else could have gotten Goodman back. And unlike our current president, for whom negotiations are transactional, with Jesse, it was based on the moral high ground, on moral authority. And I saw him in other situations dealing with the same kind of thing and making it work because he was Jesse Jackson and people respected him and or feared the popularity that he had with public opinions worldwide.
You were with Jesse Jackson in Jerusalem in 1994, where he led a march that had to make its way through the ranks of Israeli soldiers. This was after Israel had canceled a very well-planned dialogue session on reaching peace, a Palestinian session. What will you remember about that whole tableau, if you will?
Well, it was in the aftermath of Oslo. There was a lot of hope that something might happen, but our hopes were dimmed immediately when we arrived.
Oslo was the roadmap for peace, right?
Right. The Israelis were not interested in relinquishing control. No to anything in Jerusalem, no to any political meetings, no to anything that would bring Palestinians from outside Jerusalem into the city. And we talked to Rabin, we talked to Perez, Shimon Peres, Yitzhak Rabin, and got nowhere. And so Jesse said, we're doing it. They finally relented, you can do it, but you can't leave the hotel. One of the speakers we'd invited was Faisal Husseini, a leading Palestinian who lived in Orient House, and that was where his offices were. And we did the conference. We left the hotel, and Jesse said, we're going over there. The Israelis, meanwhile, had surrounded the hotel, encircled it with troops. And he said, we're going through. And in a nonviolent way, this was done in the South. We marched through the troops. Many of us were nervous. We didn't know what the Israelis would do. But what happened was, despite the commanders of the troops barking orders at their young soldiers, these soldiers saw Jesse Jackson and wanted to get their pictures taken with him. And so they broke ranks to circle him and try to get their pictures with him. And again, it was the personal power of the man defying authority to do the right thing. And finally, the commanders backed down because they weren't willing to buck Jesse Jackson.
That's really interesting. And it was not the first time you'd seen that kind of public outreach to Reverend Jackson abroad. In 1989, you traveled to Cairo together, right? What do you remember about that trip?
Well, that was quite fascinating because there was a national organization of Black women that was holding their conference there. And Jesse had become very, over the decades, very enamored of the African connection. And so they wanted to do it in Cairo. And we met with President Mubarak, met with the Pope. Jesse was pretty much taken up with the Pope Shenouda of the Coptic Church. And I remember him basically sitting at the Pope's feet almost next to him, just asking him questions about the early Christian church in Africa and the connections between early Christianity and the African continent. And I knew, because I knew Reverend, that over the next several days, that would be worked into his speeches. And it did. He was very much taken up by the history of Egypt. He was sitting one time, I walked out on the balcony of the Semiramis Hotel where we were staying, and he was sitting there looking out at the Nile. And without looking at me, he just said, "I've been to Moscow, I've been to Paris, I've been to many places." He said, "They're all great cities. This is more than that. This is a civilization." He said, "There's thousands of years going past us right now with this river as it flows by." And he was very much taken by the power of being in Egypt. We went to the pyramids. We did the whole thing, and it just really stayed with him.
What a picture you just drew there, Jim. I mean, finally, Reverend Jesse Jackson operated as a private citizen. He managed to open doors when official diplomacy stalled. Having watched that happen up close for decades, do you understand how he was able to do that?
His moral authority, in a simple phrase. He built credibility by the challenges that he presented to authority, by the courage of his conviction, by the power of his commitment to doing the right thing and taking risks. And so when he achieved that moral authority, he used it for good. Some people can just sit on their laurels. He didn't. He took advantage of the situation to get things done. The very last, let me just say, one of the last things I did with him, I'd seen him since then, but in 2024, January, we held a summit on Gaza at Operation Push, and Reverend came. He wasn't speaking a lot because the illness had taken hold, but he listened intently. He did say some words that were quite inspiring, and then at the very end, as I was leaving, I went over to say goodbye, and he grabbed my hand, and he just looked at me, and he said, "Remember the babies. They're dying every day." That was the last thing he said to me.
Finally, to that point, Jim, what do you think motivated Reverend Jackson to engage in international diplomacy when there are still so many things to wrestle with in the U.S.?
For him, it wasn't either or. Injustice anywhere is an injustice to everywhere. If one people are oppressed, all people will pay a price for it. And when he saw what was happening in Lebanon, it made him grieve. When he saw Andy Young get fired for simply speaking to the representative at the UN, he was the UN ambassador for the United States negotiating issues on the Middle East. To say he couldn't speak with the Palestinian without getting fired was unconscionable. And he felt the same about what was happening in Ireland, certainly what was happening in South Africa, what was happening in Eastern Europe. I mean, all of these caused him grief. If people were dying, if our weapons were causing people to die, if our policies were causing people to suffer, then as a leader in America, he had to speak out, and he did. As Jesse used to say, no policy is foreign to anyone in America. We all have, because our nation operates on the world stage, our people and our leaders have an obligation to address the world stage.
We will leave it there. James Zogby, a friend and associate of the late Reverend Jesse Jackson, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Later in the show, Israeli hostages are home, but they and their families are not healed. We'll hear about a program aimed at helping. You're with The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. India's capital, Delhi, is hosting big tech leaders and heads of state this week for a global summit on artificial intelligence. The Indian government is looking to break into a space that's dominated by major players from the U.S. and China. Vinay Narayan is at the summit. He's with the Opti Institute, a public research think tank based in India. So, Vinay, I would love for you to just give us a feel for what's going on at the summit. Like, describe the venue. Is it high tech everywhere you look? What stands out to you so far?
Well, it is a bit high tech, I would say. The venue is pretty sprawling, actually. It's called the Bharat Mandapam, and it's honestly quite a massive venue. But I think it has to be this massive because we've also seen extremely huge crowds attending the AI summit yesterday and today. I can't verify these numbers, but we've been told that it's nearly 150,000 people that they're expecting for this.
Wow.
Yeah, we've seen massive queues though. And the schedule is honestly quite packed. I think over the course of 5 days, they have about 300 sessions, which is honestly a little bit insane. And this is not to mention all that's happening on the sidelines at different venues across central Delhi.
When I think about 150,000 people expected, I wonder if there's going to be enough bandwidth for everyone's Wi-Fi.
That's a very good question. In fact, I don't think any of us had Wi Fi access, but we had good data access there for the most part.
So, in essence, Vinay, what's this summit about? Is there an objective?
The idea is really to think about the impact that AI is and can have. And for the Indian government, the aim has really been to showcase to the world in some ways all that India has been doing with AI. So they expanded it to be a week long sort of festival almost. And part of that is to have this expo where tech developers can come and showcase products. And the idea really is to show what India is building or what people in India are building and the potential of this. And I think this comes at a time when, sort of, as people call it, the AI arms race. And so the idea is really to think about how can states come together in some ways, but also given that this is the first AI summit happening in a global south country, India is also trying to position this in some ways as almost the flag bearer for the global south at large.
Yeah, I mean, that seems important because the summit in Delhi is supposed to be in part about bringing the global south front and center into the AI space. I'm wondering how much participation has there been, though, in fact, from other non-Western countries, countries that also want to get into the AI game?
While there has been a lot of talk from India about doing this for the global south and sort of leading the way in some senses, I think in practice, there has been a lack of follow through on that, I would say. Partners that we've had in other countries have expressed that, governments have expressed in their countries that they've been a bit disappointed with the lack of engagement that they felt from India. But again, the global south is quite large. We're told that Brazil's President Lula, will be in attendance with a big delegation in India. But even if you take a look at the working groups that were set up in the run up to this summit, I think it was primarily sort of global north countries that were invited to chair them. And so overall, I think there has been a sentiment of displeasure in some ways.
If we look just at India, which has established a reputation over the years for R&D around high tech, where is India in the AI race compared to, say, the US or China?
In terms of building these massive language models, I don't think India is close to where the US or China are. I think what the focus on has been in India is to sort of build smaller, more purpose-built models that are more contextual to India. And by this, I mean models that can work with some of our local languages, which has not necessarily been a focus for some of the models that we're seeing coming out of the US or China, and for good reason. There's a massive diversity of languages in India. And so we're seeing developers, one, try and build some of these. And even the Indian government has taken some steps with building something called Bhashini, which is a database of Indian languages. And in addition to that, and I think the big area that we're seeing a lot of Indian developers working on is really using the established large language models that we can get from other countries to then build applications for contextual purposes here. And so they're effectively acting as layers on top of these models. And I think that's really where we see a lot of the development in India.
So this AI summit in Delhi that you're attending, Vinay, it sounds like part convention, part talking shop. There is a declaration expected by the end. What would you hope is stated in that declaration?
Well, for one, I hope that there's, significant focus on putting red lines around AI development and deployment. It would also be really nice to see them call out some of the labor that underpins a lot of the AI industry.
The labor.
The labor, yes. So, there's a massive amount of human beings who have to label data for that data to then be able to be used to train AI systems. There's a wonderful piece in Time magazine sometime last year or the year before where there was an expose on how there was almost these sweatshop-like conditions being run in Kenya where human beings were made to do data labeling for very, very small wages in very poor conditions. And I think this is something that continues. And lastly, I think some strong commitments around the environmental cost that AI has. I think a lot of this is getting quite out of hand. We've already, in many ways, reached significant points of sort of breaking points when it comes to the environment. And I think AI is really significantly contributing to that problem.
Vinay Narayan is with the Opti Institute, a public research think tank based in India. He joined us from the AI Summit in Delhi. And now an update on a few other stories we're following. Officials at the Winter Olympics have already had to enforce a new rule banning the use of fluorinated waxes on skis and snowboards. Those waxes contain so-called forever chemicals, and they have been banned in competition because of their adverse effects on human health and the environment. We reported on this last week. South Korean cross-country skiers Han Da-som and Lee Ui-jin were disqualified from last Tuesday's women's sprint event. The Japanese snowboarder Shiba Masaki was disqualified from the men's parallel giant slalom. In Spain, the government has approved 7 billion euros worth of aid to people affected by the severe flooding in the country's southern regions. That assistance will go to more than 12,000 people who were evacuated, as well as businesses and farms that were impacted. Portugal has also appropriated 2.5 billion euros in aid to people affected by the same storm. And in Cuba, garbage is piling up on the streets of Havana, attracting pests and creating a stench from rotting food. The U.S. blockade on oil shipments to Cuba has created the situation. Fuel has become so scarce that fewer than half of Havana's garbage trucks can run their collection routes. More global stories coming your way. Stay with us. You're listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. The U.S. and Mexico have economies that are deeply intertwined. And that goes for all kinds of businesses and for families, too. Millions of people in Mexico rely on money sent by loved ones here in the United States to make ends meet. In fact, Mexico is one of the top destinations in the world for remittances. But those transfers are now declining for the first time in more than a decade. From Mexico City, The World's Tibis Isaiah explains.
In a modest home in the state of Mexico, Luz Maria Chaboya is feeling that shift firsthand.
Antes mi hijo me mandaba que me apoyaba para gastos, por ejemplo, para pagar luz, para la comida.
She says the money her two sons used to send from the U.S. helped cover utilities and food. But lately, that support has dried up, and she worries about why.
Entonces se tienen que cuidar muchísimo. Porque como no tienen papeles, me da miedo que los agarren y los boten por allá.
She says her sons don't have legal status in the U.S., and they are afraid to go to work and afraid of being deported. Chaboya, who is 74 years old, is now doing small jobs, taking care of a sick neighbor or selling pastries. Across the U.S., immigration crackdowns have made many migrants more cautious about working. Manuel Orozco is an expert on migrant remittances at the Inter-American Dialogue.
There is a decline in the number of remittance centers across all Latino migrant communities. There is less people sending money.
But while fewer people are sending money, the total amount of money sent from the U.S. to much of Latin America actually rose last year. That means migrants from countries like Guatemala, Honduras, or Haiti have been sending larger amounts to family at home, mainly because they fear they won't be able to send in the near future. But Mexico is the exception. Remittances to Mexico fell by nearly 5% in 2025. That's the largest annual drop in over a decade.
Mexico is the only country where remittances actually declined in 2025, and it's a unique development that responds predominantly to demographic changes.
Orozco says migrants tend to send more money in their first years abroad. Over time, they send less and less. And Mexican migrants, on average, have already been in the U.S. for decades. As they age and settle, some send less or stop altogether. And there aren't a lot of new migrants from Mexico arriving to replace those long-time senders.
Particularly in 2025, there was very little migration from Mexico to the U.S., and that didn't help the sending of money.
Demographics are a major factor, but it's not the only one. Helen Dempster focuses on migration at the Center for Global Development. She points to the exchange rate.
We know that the real value of the Mexican peso has increased relative to the US dollar. Every dollar coming from the US buys between 14 and 16% less than it did 12 months ago.
That means it's more expensive to buy Mexican pesos. Whether the decline in remittances continues is unclear.
Personally, I think it's part of a longer-term shift. The net migration rate from Mexico has been falling for some years now and will likely continue to fall as the Mexican economy strengthens. And it's hard to see the restrictive immigration policies in the US getting better anytime soon.
Still, Manuel Orozco says deportations have created labor gaps, about 400,000 jobs. And President Trump could be forced to expand temporary work visas, potentially bringing more Mexican workers north and more remittances flowing south. For the World, I'm Tibisa Isea, Mexico City.
The new Prime Minister of Bangladesh was sworn in today. For the last 18 months, the country was run by a caretaker government. This was following nationwide student-led protests in 2024 that toppled the previous Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina. She fled to India, and now Tariq Rahman from the Bangladesh Nationalist Party leads the government as the new Prime Minister. He's also the son of a former Prime Minister.
আমি সশ্রদ্ধ চিত্তে তারেক রহমান সশস্ত্র চিত্রে
Today's swearing-in ceremony took place on the lawn outside of the Parliament building in Dhaka. The World's Carolyn Beeler has been covering the story for us from the Bangladeshi capital and began by telling us about Prime Minister Rahman.
He represents both something new right now, but also a continuation of a very powerful political dynasty here. In terms of expectations for the new prime minister, I want to share a quote from the leading English language newspaper here. This moment marks more than a change of government. It signals a renewed public resolve to restore democratic norms. And that is kind of something in less highfalutin language I was hearing from a lot of people I was talking to. They were really glad this election went off without any major violence. It was a democratic election, and the opposition parties have accepted the result, which is not a given here. The new prime minister also visited the homes of opposition lawmakers on Sunday as a show of goodwill, which is something that's never happened here before.
So for a year and a half, we should remember there's been an interim government, and that follows almost 2 decades of rule by a single party. What does this new government say it wants to change about Bangladesh?
Well, tackling corruption was the number one priority for voters, according to polling before the election. Transparency International ranks Bangladesh as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Newly appointed Minister of Home Affairs Salahuddin Ahmed says changing that is among the government's top priorities. He's saying here that the new government will establish law and order in the country, improve the economy, and remove corruption. Today, in his first cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Tariq Rahman said MPs would not take tax-free cars or government-appointed plots of land, which has long been one of the perks of their office. So, again, that is seen as something of a move toward restoring integrity to politics.
So on the economy in Bangladesh, what are the biggest points to mention around the economic situation there?
Well, Bangladesh was once one of the fastest growing economies in Asia, but it is an economy largely built on exports, especially the garment industry. That was hard hit during COVID. The protests that would eventually oust Sheikh Hasina also disrupted that industry, and then U.S. tariffs are not helping either. Newly installed Education Minister Bobby Hodge referenced all this when I spoke with him before the election.
We've gone through some really hard economic turmoil over the last few years, so development is the issue.
I imagine that was a top concern for voters in this election. I mean, basically, it's another version of "It's the economy, stupid," right?
Yeah, exactly. I think voters everywhere look toward the economy when casting their ballots. And prices here specifically are a big deal. Inflation has been rising. It hit 8.5% last month. And in a country where many, many people live on just a few dollars a day, that really hurts. I was north of Dhaka in an area where there are a lot of garment factories the other day and met a woman there named Asma Akhtar. She was waiting in line for some subsidized rice and flour, and she told me that food costs are the most important thing going forward for her. She's saying here she doesn't need much from the new government, just food at reasonable prices so she can feed her family. Bangladesh is also a very young country. Around 40% of Bangladeshis are under 30. And for Meher Kaisar, who is in marketing, that means one thing.
Job seeking. So there is a lot of educated students in Bangladesh. They need a job, and we have to create a new job. It's a big challenge as well.
And of course, Marco, there is a feeling of kind of tenuousness of democracy itself here, which I think is a challenge that the government is going to have going forward. A lot of people are going to look to how they resolve it and continue what feels like a turned page in Bangladesh's history.
The world's Carolyn Beeler in the Bangladeshi capital Dhaka on swearing-in day for the country's new Prime Minister Tariq Rahman. Carolyn, thanks for your reporting.
Thank you, Marco.
Israelis are still waiting for answers. They want to know why the border with Gaza was so poorly defended on October 7th, 2023, and why the army was slow to respond to the Hamas-led attack that day. The government of Benjamin Netanyahu is blocking an independent investigation into what happened. It was and remains traumatic for much of the country, especially the hostages themselves and their families. A new study is underway to figure out how best to help family members of those who were taken. Stephanie Fried reports from Tel Aviv.
Iris is grappling with pain. For privacy's sake, that's not her real name. Stay with me. Breathe. Keep your eyes open. Coach is kneeling on either side of the ice bath urge. Iris's arms are covered in goosebumps and her teeth are chattering. It's like giving birth, she gasps. That's the point. Freeze out internal stress to make way for healing. Iris and a dozen other Israelis are attending a day retreat to rewire their physical and neurological systems. I'm outside the first tent, which is the guided meditation and ice bath tent. They've asked me not to come inside because they want their privacy, especially while they meditate and breathe. They are all relatives of hostages who were held in Gaza for months or even years. When living hostages came back, it was clear they'd need extensive therapy. What wasn't clear was that their extended family members, cousins, nieces, and nephews would too. Thousands of relatives of hostages held in Gaza aren't able to resume so-called normal life. They've lost homes, jobs, relationships, and some have had their teeth and hair fall out. Their struggles gave rise to the NGO 255, named for the 255 hostages held in Gaza after October 7, 2023. Founder and director Moore Peretz, who spoke with me by phone, says the scale of that day's abductions is globally unprecedented.
No one knew how to treat it correctly. And also, when we wanted to learn from the ward, we didn't have any place to learn from.
255 organizes and oversees a range of therapies for immediate and extended hostage family members. There are counseling sessions, meetups, retreats, surf clubs, dialogue groups, and the list goes on. Peretz says the NGO is also developing a treatment model to share beyond Israel's borders.
We're doing a mapping of the family to understand what was the damage to each one of the families. And this is the way for us to understand which one of the family members is the one that needs the treatment the most.
Mapping is like creating a family tree with 3 tiers, from kids, siblings, and parents in the inner tier to cousins, nieces, and nephews in the outer tier. The process began 8 months ago, and 3/4 of all 4,000 hostage relatives are currently mapped. But it's only recently that 255 began this study of what might best help family members recover. When it wraps in June, 255 will present their findings and treatment proposals to Israel's Social Welfare Ministry. The plan will include options for all hostage family members for the rest of their lives. The estimated cost, $25 million a year. Overseeing the project is Professor Yuval Neria. He's the director of Columbia University's PTSD treatment and research program. Neria is also the senior consultant at Israel's leading social research institute, Brookdale. He's collaborating with the Israeli government on research into the lasting effects of October 7 events and the ensuing Gaza war.
Any forced captivity for political reasons, for reasons that involve combat and terrorism, is one of the worst trauma that human beings can endure. Spouses, children, siblings, parents, all of this social structure is terribly affected by the trauma.
Nitzan Goldstein's life is overshadowed by trauma.
On the October 7, my big brother and my niece was murdered in their house, and my sister-in-law and my 3 nephews was kidnapped to Gaza. The house that I grew up burned to ashes. Actually, I lost everything I knew till then.
Nitzan is standing in a circle with a few dozen other 255 hostage family members at a surf club just north of Tel Aviv. Half are under 15. They meet every other week, and most of them never surfed until a few months ago when 255 formed this group. After 2 hours in the tide, they share experiences. 2 months ago, Nitzan's surf guide told her she'd be navigating waves by July. She told him, "Dream on." But it was the kind of affirmation and recognition she needed in life and on the water. Today, she caught her first wave.
People don't see us. In Israel, we are just brothers or aunts. We are invisible. So your brother was murdered. Okay, so all your friends was murdered. Okay, so what? Keep on moving. This is your life.
Nitzan's 12-year-old daughter, Aviv, is standing beside her in a pink terry cloth robe. She has rust-colored hair, a smattering of freckles across her cheeks, and a broad smile that remains fixed during our conversation. Nitzan says this is new.
She's smiling again.
Michael Levy is also in the circle with his 8-year-old daughter. Michael's brother Or was held hostage in Gaza for 491 days. It's okay. It's over, Michael consoled his sobbing brother Or as they reunited. But a year later, it's still not okay.
The day that all came back, everyone felt, okay, that's it for them. The actual feeling was the exact opposite. It was just the beginning of trying to understand what we've been through and trying to find a new life.
During the time his brother was held, Michael campaigned relentlessly for Or's release, traveling constantly, granting thousands of interviews and meetings, including with the Pope and Donald Trump.
His brother Michael is traveling and sharing his story in hopes of a safe return.
Michael Levy joins us.
Michael Levy, welcome to 7:30.
Well, good morning.
While Levy campaigned, his 3 daughters back home suffered, scared to let him or their mother out of their sight, scared to go to school. One daughter stopped eating, lost 20 pounds, and stopped growing.
Like every post-trauma, there are days where they don't want to go to school or react in certain ways that sometimes you can't even understand what's going on until you think about it and understand that it's part of the post-trauma.
Michael is an inner circle hostage relative, so he gets lifelong government support. His outer circle daughters don't. Yet. That's where 255 is stepping in to change government policy. So far, the collaboration has been positive. Michael is back at his tech job as he comes to terms with what he and his family endured for 491 days. More than 2 years after her home was torched, Nitsan and her family are still in temporary housing. And yet, she expresses a glimmer of optimism.
Yeah, I can see the horizon. It's a little bit blurred, but I can see the horizon. Lives continue. We are not dead.
For The World, I'm Stephanie Fried in Tel Aviv.
You're with The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. Here in the U.S., it's been years since we've seen the Marlboro Man on giant billboards or on TV screens. In Indonesia, there are ads pretty much everywhere about the joys of cigarettes. The country has one of the world's highest rates of smoking, at least among men. Dave Grunbaum reports from Jakarta, the capital, on the reasons behind that trend and a program that aims to reverse it.
School is out for the day in Jakarta. I'm at what's locally called a warkop, which are inexpensive coffee shops that are often outdoors like this one. In the corner is a group that includes about 15 boys ages 14 to 18. Some are playing board games while sipping coffee, tea, and cola. Most of them also smoke, including 17-year-old Aditya Pratama, a high school student and aspiring engineer who began smoking 2 years ago.
Tapi tahu apa dampaknya itu. Ya berpengaruh di kesehatan paru-paru ataupun.
Aditya says he understood the health risks when he started, but his curiosity was so strong that he tried it and eventually became a daily smoker. But for many other guys, he says, to be a man, you have to smoke.
Buat orang-orang yang kayak ngerasa jantan, cowok atau mas.
Almost 60% of Indonesian males ages 15 and up smoke tobacco, one of the highest rates in the world according to the World Health Organization, while only 1% of Indonesian women smoke.
The tobacco industry clearly make the advertisements, make the image of the cigarette as a masculinity, successful man, a bold man, adventure, experience kind of things. So these kind of advertisements really attract men.
Public health advocate Mohammed Bigwanto is a former pack-a-day smoker who quit almost 20 years ago. He's now the executive director of the Indonesia Health Policy Forum. Bigwanto says the tobacco industry has spent decades successfully marketing an image in Indonesia about cigarette smoking.
The tobacco industry have a lot of influence in policy making and policy development.
In Indonesia, cigarettes are advertised on TV, billboards, and tobacco companies sponsor popular events including sports and music festivals. All of this is banned in the U.S., and similar restrictions are in place in most countries around the world.
So we are really surrounded by this aggressive marketing approach by the tobacco industry.
Deanne Rose Diana is the executive director of the Jalen Foundation, a local nonprofit working on environmental issues and public health, including tobacco use.
Even we look out in the windows, or we are, on our ride to the office, you can see a lot of billboard.
The United Cigarette Manufacturing Association of Indonesia did not respond to requests for comment about attempts to limit tobacco advertisements or charges that the association has an undue influence on government policy. In a written statement, the Indonesian Ministry of Health said it values constructive input from the public and considers such engagement essential for strengthening implementation and accountability. Public health advocates have had several victories. Smoking is banned indoors in public places. Some communities ban cigarette ads on billboards, including Indonesia's biggest city, Jakarta. Plus, new regulations went into effect nationwide almost 2 years ago, which include raising the legal age to buy cigarettes from 18 to 21.
Lebih tepatnya itu peraturan yang tidak berguna.
In my opinion, that rule is useless, says teen smoker Aditya Pratama. Even though there's already a regulation setting the age at 21, many shops still sell carelessly, freely.
Ya, dengan apa ya?
An Indonesian colleague of mine walked into a convenience store in Jakarta and asked the cashier the age requirement to buy cigarettes.
Oh, Mas mau nanya dong, kalau di sini beli rokok minimal umur pembeliannya berapa ya? Bebas.
The reply? No requirement. Again, public health advocate Deanne Rose Deanna.
It is actually not clear which ministry should be enforcing this law.
The Ministry of Health says it works with multiple agencies to enforce regulations, especially to protect children and adolescents. So while Deanne is doubtful about enforcement, her organization is trying to decrease the demand for cigarettes.
3, 2, 1.
A few months ago, the Jalen Foundation started a program that targets boys ages 12 to 19. There are about 30 meetups a week in Jakarta. Sometimes groups play sports, but more often they meet at the neighborhood workshops, including the one where I met Aditya.
Semenjak di sini jadi kayak punya banyak teman, wawasan jadi banyak.
Aditya says he has made new friends at these meetups, where they share information and discuss their future plans. This gathering is led by 3 men who don't smoke, including Yulianto Hadi Pariro, a former martial artist who teaches graphic design at a local university.
Jadi ketika mereka merokok, saya tidak langsung melarang
Hadi
mereka.
Pariro says when the boys smoke, he does not tell them to stop. Instead, he tries to engage them in a friendly, casual conversation about how smoking could impact their performance in sports and potential health implications. There's no scolding, lecturing, or force-feeding of information about the risks.
Ngobrolin apa? Oh, lo suka olahraga gitu. I like sport gitu.
It's too early to measure the overall success of the program, which is gradually expanding. But Aditya and several other boys told me they plan to quit smoking, and these meetups have increased their motivation. For The World, I'm Dave Grunebaum in Jakarta, Indonesia.
The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston and from the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. Find us online anytime at theworld.org. I'm Marco Werman. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the Lumina Foundation, committed to a fair, universal system for learning beyond high school that offers every American the chance for a better life. LuminaFoundation.org. By the PRX Ambassador Council, whose members include Judy Piggott, the Gruber Family Foundation, the Schmidt Family Foundation, and Gavin Salmonese, LLC. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX.